Carlos King just featured an episode of his podcast with Charisse Jackson of The Real Housewives of Potomac. Oh yes, one of the OGs was in the building, and Carlos got to all the questions that we all have been dying to know, such as why exactly is Charisse back on the show? We're going to get all the way into it. I'm going to encourage you guys to go listen to the podcast for yourself because it's always more interesting to hear it in her words. But, we can sort of recap it and also give some speculation and our inside thoughts as well. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So they talk about how they, all met down in Miami during the Miami trip. Carlos was down to the Miami and visited with Charisse, Robin, and Giselle. Now, Charisse says that the Grand Dame title is self-appointed, but actually I believe that Giselle gave that title to Karen. And Charisse says that it's okay with her. She does not want that title. But when they talk about being an OG on the show, she does mention that she helped cast the show. The casting director actually called her and she thought it was a joke, okay? She legit thought it was a joke. She then said, it kind of became her mission. She just started interviewing people in Starbucks, to really help find the cast for this show. And she says it was really hard at first because, people in Potomac have very deep pockets and she really couldn't get anyone to do it. The ones that wanted to do it, their husbands wouldn't allow them to do it. I always feel like people with a lot of money, sometimes they are looking for fame, and sometimes people with a lot of money just want to hold on to their money, make more money, and live a life of privacy so that they can enjoy their freedom and their livelihoods and do what they need to do. You know what I'm saying? Quite frankly, I don't blame those people. Anyway, she was asked if she could go. Well, she asked the network, or the casting director, I should say, if she could go outside of Potomac to start looking for women who may be interested in the show. And they said, absolutely. So she ended up hitting up Giselle and Robin. Now, Karen was actually added by default, according to Charisse. So apparently people thought that she knew Karen because they sat at the same table at a gala. But apparently they really didn't know each other. According to Charisse, the way this all went down was that someone recommended Karen to sit at one of Charisse's table, because Charisse had several tables at this gala. And Charisse didn't realize that Karen was working to sit at her table. And Karen ended up sitting at one of them, but she didn't actually get a chance to either see or meet Karen. Now, this is the story that Charisse tells about how she first came to know of Karen. But she had to be reminded of all of this by, I guess, one of the other casting directors. So apparently she found out that Giselle and Karen actually knew each other. And so that became a more natural fit. So Carlos likened, Charisse's experience helping to cast Potomac as something similar to what Nene did for Atlanta. And so he asked her, being an OG of the show, did you feel a certain type of way when you got fired? Charisse says no. Right before this happened, she had lost 3 siblings in 2 years, which, guys, listen, losing people, I've seen so much loss, in terms of having friends being lost. I have a funeral to go to next Monday for my uncle that passed. It's just a lot of things going on. So I can definitely understand not being in the best frame of mind. And she said she had really no desire to be on the show. She just wanted to help cast it, which honestly, I feel like would be really fun. She says, but they wanted her to be on the show because she was the glue. And she said the timing was just horrible. She wasn't going through the divorce when they said she was going through the divorce on the show, which was very interesting to me because I'm like, why would they frame it like that? But she did say that that her husband told her that if she did do this show, that they would probably get a divorce. And so she began to spiral. She had given up her career and much of the things that she was very much into for her marriage. And so she ultimately decided that she would do the show, and she thought it was going to be fun. And then now she's doing the show and she's getting a divorce. And there's allegations of her sleeping with a fireman. She says that she was going through her divorce in her second season, and looking back at it, she was depressed and didn't know she was broken. And you guys may have seen her episode of Ayanla Fix My Life, where she kind of really goes back into the history of the marriage and the divorce and how it affected her. So this, what she's saying, I definitely believe to be 100% true. So when season 3 came and she came on as a friend, she said it was good, but her stuff wasn't moving in TV time. What does that mean? So in TV time, that kind of means that you're operating within the cycle of a TV show. So one season we see her going through a divorce. The next season, they're going to want to see her, that divorce wrapped up and finalized and dating. And that just wasn't the case for where she was. She says it was good for her to not come back on because at that point in time, she was just mentally checked out. So what made her want to come back? Well, especially knowing that this show is about a bunch of women who will throw you under the bus, is what Carlos asked her. So apparently she got a text from Lorraine. Now, many of you guys have heard that name Lorraine before. My assumption is that Lorraine is like a network executive. And so Lorraine said that they wanted to see her back for season 7. She's still cool with everyone except the one person, and I think we know who that is, and we'll get into that in just a second. Much of the cast was cool with having her back. She wasn't sure if she wanted to come back because she was at peace, at a peaceful place in her life, but they allowed her to come on as much as she wanted. And her intent was to be the fun girl, but she quickly realized that you can't have that type of plan for yourself when you get on these shows. So when we think about Charisse in terms of what I said earlier during my recap for this past week, how a lot of the times I feel like she's just kind of there. This kind of explains her intentions, at least from the perspective of not trying to really make any waves on the show, but just to kind of come back and maybe seemingly just hang out with some girlfriends and, do it on television. I'm not necessarily sure, but I feel like if you're going to be a part of a show, then you need to have an instrumental part of it, because otherwise that spot could be going to someone who's going to be doing something. And I don't mean any offense when I say that about her, because I feel like obviously something's bubbling under the surface between her and Karen. But I just think of, when I think of the effectiveness of a good friend, I think of people like Sutton, and I think of people like Marlo, to the point where they were such good friends, if you know what I mean, that they ultimately became cast members. Meanwhile, Carlos says, well, Giselle indicated that you knew some things about Karen during his interview with her. And he does refer back to her blue eyes comments from the season, I think it was the season 2 reunion. And we see Karen throughout the season sort of seeming to run from Charisse. And Giselle indicated on Carlos King's podcast that some tea does get spilled. And at that point, Giselle does do some talking about it. So the question is, does Charisse know some things about Karen's marriage where she has allegedly been unfaithful? So Charisse says this: well, in the streets of Potomac, it was something that was being said. And this started before the show even started, before she even knew Karen. Apparently, the people in the streets of Potomac were allegedly calling Karen the old black lady. Okay. Now, this must be the white people in Potomac saying this, because I don't know what black people are going to be saying the old black lady down the street or whatever. That just didn't seem to make much sense to me when listening with my critical ear. But I, would have to assume that there are a lot of white people in Potomac. But, when you drive through Potomac, it's not like they just hanging out in the streets. So it's kind of hard to tell. I would like further clarification on that one from Charisse, but I'll phone a friend and ask around to see what the climate is like over there in Potomac, and if anybody has heard of or seen the old black lady running around in the streets. with not a name being attached to her, just known as the old black lady, similar to Bigfoot or the Wendigo. Okay. Anyway, she goes on to say that all of a sudden, this old black lady becomes Karen Huger, and all these things that she's been hearing about and knowing about, and that she's seen certain things, it all makes sense. She says she doesn't really talk about people, but at this local restaurant called The Village, this local black lady used to get drunk, fall off the bar stools, and run after the little boys. And that's her reputation as the old drunk black lady. But Charisse refuses to tell all Karen's business. Now, Carlos then asks about the blue-eyed man. And then he says, well, it was Karen allegedly called Charisse a harlot. And so Carlos says, well, were you also having an affair? And Charisse says Karen just wants to say those things about her. So Carlos asks, are we going to see her and Karen have this conversation about the things that she's heard about Karen being the old black lady running around drunk in the streets of Potomac? Because we've seen the previews where they go at it. And so Karen has said also on her own YouTube platform, which I highly encourage you guys to go and subscribe to, she says that she doesn't F with Charisse. So Charisse says Karen doesn't have a reason to dislike her. Carlos says, well, you did just call her the old drunk black lady. And Charisse says, well, this is the first time I've ever said that, though, so that's exclusive. She says, but Karen just likes to talk about her and she doesn't know why. So Carlos is like, well, where did this animosity stem from? So Charisse then says she doesn't know where it comes from. She knows that she said something about that Karen has said it was something about her mom. But for Charisse's part, she says she told Karen that she had not been a very good friend to her. And apparently Karen took offense. So for Charisse, she said they were going through the same stages in their lives, particularly with their parents. And she thought that she and Karen were bonding. And everyone thought that they would be good friends because they're only 2 years apart in age. But Charisse then says, yes, I know that's hard to tell. So my thought is, if Charisse and Karen are 2 years apart in age, why are they running around talking about Karen being this old black lady when really, in fact, the two of them are 2 years apart? That is wild to me, how people like to throw that age thing around, particularly when the two people involved are close in age. That's very odd. Anyway, she says that, if Karen would call her and be emotional, she would drop everything she was doing and run and be there for her. But Karen is not good at that. She's not a girl's girl, according to Charisse. And when Charisse's dad passed, Karen didn't even offer her any support, like send her any flowers or anything like that. But she did send her a text saying sorry for your loss. So I guess Charisse was hoping for more. And then Carlos says, well, what happened at the table, at the dinner table in the preview? All Charisse would say, because she couldn't say much, was that Karen was allegedly constantly lying and making up accusations, and everything she came back with was stuff that had nothing to do with her. So I kind of wonder what this was about. Was it about Charisse and Monique? And so then she says, Karen kept attacking her with lies, and she got pissed off and triggered, and now she regrets it. And Charisse says that she doesn't even remember most of it. Carlos is like, you blacked out? Charisse says, yeah, the next day, everyone was still stuck from the night before. And she says it was horrible. And Carlos jokes, well, that's probably why she doesn't F with you. And then so Charisse says, well, she's uneffable. Then she says that she backed herself up with the truth. Speaking of lying, Carlos says, Robin and Wendy had it out, as we recall, at the winery. And so it was about whether or not Robin was standing up and trying to walk towards Wendy, and whether or not Charisse had to hold her back. So Carlos asks, well, the camera shows that you did indeed hold her back. Charisse says, no, I didn't push her. I just touched her. She's still saying that Robin was not walking towards Wendy, but we did see Robin get up and take steps towards Wendy's direction. Charisse also says, well, I'm from New Jersey, so when someone gets up, you jump up. She claims it wasn't a threatening situation and that Robin wasn't going to fight her because they also had security there. She says it was supposed to be an empowerment thing. There's fault in this logic, because if you're telling me that you're from New Jersey and when you see somebody get up, you know it's about to go down, that's essentially what you're saying. So the fact of the matter is, if you thought enough that your instincts kicked in, obviously this is you having to hold her back. Now, whether or not Robin's actual intent was to get up and pop Wendy across the face or something like that, we cannot say, because it did not happen. I would like to think that she was not going to do that, but in my experience, the security on these shows seemed to be very lacking, because ultimately, if the security were so secure, then it would seem to me as though there would have been a quicker response to the situation between Mia and Wendy down to the Miami. And I definitely didn't see security jump up and spring into action in any way, shape, or form when Robin had gotten up out of her seat and was trying to walk in the direction of Wendy. Now, again, we don't know what Robin was going to do, but at the end of the day, we do know that Charisse got up, put her hands on her, and stopped her from doing anything. Carlos then has to tell her, girl, if you thought this was empowering, there's nothing empowering about this show. And so Charisse says she stood up to keep them away from each other. And when she came back, it seemed like when she came back to the show, it seemed like most of the ladies didn't like Wendy. And she was trying to get people to like Wendy. And she says the only thing with Wendy, she told her that she wanted Wendy to be the type of person who didn't get all about it all the time and would just say things that people would have to Google. She says that she was hoping that Wendy would just cut people with her words. And I'm thinking to myself, I get what she's trying to say, because, Wendy does have 4 degrees. But my thought about it is, really, in truth, I mean, that is pretty much what Wendy does. Wendy is I think that Candace is probably a more natural wordsmith, but I think that Wendy also uses her words to cut people. And so this logic that Charisse is providing us, to me, it doesn't hold any weight in this instance, because I feel like that is exactly what Wendy does. It is just a matter of whether or not people like her methods of doing so or not. So she says that Rob and Wendy really like Wendy a lot, but that neither will listen to each other. And she hopes that it works out, but we'll see what happens. And they talk about Wendy and whether or not she's changed or not. And Charisse says she learned about something new about Wendy from Carlos's, previous interview with her. So that was great. She says everyone on the show is amazing, even Karen. When asked if she would go back full time, she would love to be a full time, but if she had to pick someone to leave to replace, she wouldn't be able to do so. So I thought that was a really great answer. With regards to if she had to pick her own top 5 housewives, she really didn't kind of answer the question. She just said the OGs. So Carlos had to take from that would mean Charisse, Giselle, Robin, Katie, Ashley, and Karen. Now, he asked about the rest of the season, and she doesn't host any events or anything like that for the rest of the season. But they did talk about her going to the Wearable Art Gala and how the lowest ticket price for that was $3,500, which is what she paid. And she says that next year she is intending to get a table. So that was pretty much the gist of it all. And I've also thrown in some of my own opinions and thoughts about the situation. Overall, it was a great interview. She does say that she has a podcast coming soon. So if you are fans of Charisse, definitely be sure to follow her on Instagram and then follow her podcast endeavors. We over here at this channel, we like to support whatever the people are out there doing, and however the people want to expand their empires. I'm all the way here for it, because, the more of us that are out there in business and getting our voices heard, the better. So with that being said, let me know what you guys think about all this, and I will catch you in the next video.